What makes a murderer's mind tick? Killer Psyche is a true crime podcast from Wondery that explores these types of questions about the crimes that killers and criminals commit. Killer Psyche covers the high-profile cases that have shocked the world, and host Candice DeLong uses her 5 decades of experience as a clinical psychiatric nurse and FBI criminal profiler to dissect the motivations and behaviors of the most terrifying felons in history. And you'll definitely want to listen to a recent episode of Killer Psyche where Candice looks into the mysterious murder of Ted Amon, a wealthy Wall Street financier. Ted had been going through a divorce with his wife of 13 years, Generosa, and millions in assets and child custody were at stake. Generosa and her boyfriend Danny Pelosi were the prime suspects, but Generosa died of cancer before police could prove her involvement. In 2004, Danny was convicted of second-degree murder, but still maintains his innocence. How does hatred drive a person to murder the father of their children? But one of the highlights of the show for me personally was just how knowledgeable Candice is regarding all of the peripheral details to a case. It was really fascinating to gain insights into the aspects that, generally speaking, are either overlooked or not considered in much detail when viewing what is available to the general public. Candice clearly has a lot of expertise in her field, and the reflections she provides are really intriguing. Listen to Killer Psyche on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or you can listen ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app. So this first story happened to me when I was 16 and lived in my parents' house. It was late one night in summer and I was in one of my 2 bedrooms. My brother and sister, both older than me, already lived in their own, and I got one of their bedrooms for myself, which sort of made me get 2. In one bedroom, I spent the night sleeping in my bed next to my desk and closet. The other one I would spend the day over there, sort of packed with my TV, my PlayStation, a sofa, and another closet. I was watching South Park on TV around 2:30 in the morning while laying on my sofa. I always stayed up that late during the summer holidays, and why I remember this so well is because of the episode of South Park that was running on MTV this night, The Losing Edge. It's my favorite episode, and on that day it was quite hot in Germany, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky the whole day. So, as I said, it was nighttime, still really hot. Hot here is like 26 degrees Celsius. But while I was watching TV, all of a sudden, the temperature just dropped, and I felt like cold air in my room. The next thing that I remember were faint noises from outside my room. At first, I thought that one of my parents were maybe out there, who were sleeping, since I hadn't seen them open a door for like a couple of hours. But that wasn't it. The noise got louder, and I muted my TV just to listen to the noises and to try and locate where they were coming from. And they definitely came from outside of my room. So I got up, walked to the door and opened it. The hallway was pitch black and I couldn't see anything, except for the steps to my right, which were lit up by my still running muted TV screen. Also, I couldn't really make out that both of my parents were asleep. That's because my parents, even to this day, sleep in separate rooms because of heavy snoring. Both of them, that is. So, it definitely wasn't my parents, but what was that noise? I step into the hallway, and to the right down the hallway. On the left side was the front door, and both my rooms were the first rooms to the left and right from the front door, which meant that I needed to go deeper into the house to locate the noises. As I walked through the dark hallway, I could sort of make out that the noises sounded like cupboard doors opening and closing, but not rapidly, more like slowly and gently, with the familiar clonk of wood hitting on the wood at the end. But the only room in our house with cupboards was the kitchen, which is in the same room as the living room and the dining room. So, step by step, I sort of walked to the door, my head to the side, pushing my ear forward, trying to hear the sound better. The next thing that I heard was sort of like a rattling sound, as if two plates were constantly put onto each other, and I thought that maybe one of my parents must be inside the kitchen. So I took the door handle into my hand and began to turn it, and all of a sudden there was just nothing. The sound stopped all of a sudden. I decided not to step into the kitchen, and I turned around to walk back into my room, through the still dark hallway. And that's when the sound started up again. Halfway back, I turned around in the middle of the hallway and walked back to the door again, but when I got there, nothing. The sound stopped again. My heart started to race at that moment. I wasn't sure if I should open the door or not, so I waited for a full 30 seconds just to see if the sound restarted, and yeah, it did. They started again, and this time even louder and much more frantic than before. I was half scared out of my mind at this point, but I collected my courage and I opened the door. As I stepped into the kitchen and lit up the room, the sound stopped. And the strangest thing was that the kitchen was completely untouched. Everything was in its place. But I freaked when I felt the cold air pass by me while I was still standing in the kitchen, panicky, turning around, and man, that is the most terrifying moment that I've ever been through. Moments later, I could feel the hot air from the summer night again. I shut the light, closed the door, and I ran back into my room. There was heavy breathing, sweating, and my heart was racing like crazy. Needless to say, I wondered the whole night what the heck this incident was. I didn't sleep not even a minute. The next morning, I asked my parents if they noticed anything or if they were in the kitchen after midnight at all, but they almost simultaneously said no. So then, the obvious question is, what was it? So, the first paranormal experience that I had was back when my age was in the single digits, maybe around 7 or 8 years old. I grew up in the Midwest, Ohio to be more specific. The town, or village as we grew up calling it, was not large by any means, maybe around 40 to 50 people at most. During this time, though, my family didn't have the internet or cable TV. Cell phones were just starting to become mainstream, mid-90s era, and as such, entertainment was mostly chores or roaming the surrounding area, just exploring. My house was backed by fairly dense woods. There was a steep decline with a relatively flat wooded area where a creek ran through it. This creek wasn't very deep, waist deep in certain areas, but mostly knee or ankle deep. But it was pretty wide. Growing up, I practically lived in those woods, hiking up and down that creek, mapping the woods, exploring a few long abandoned and collapsed houses that nature reclaimed. I lived and breathed nature practically, and those woods were my home, away from home. My father grew up in that area. My aunt and uncle and cousins lived just next door, and it was a pretty close-knit community. Naturally, everyone has ghost stories about their own hometown, a haunted house, a tragedy of some sort that remains a stain on its history. And my village, well, it was no different. My father would always tell stories about ghosts or abnormal happenings that he experienced in his youth here. One thing that he would always tell me when I told him that I was going into the woods was, the trees may not walk about or talk, but they do see and remember. I always thought of that as him just saying, don't be stupid out there. Now, my first encounter with the people of the woods, which is what I always called them, was when I was on one of my daily excursions into the wild green. It was mid-July and it was hot and humid. I stuck mostly to the creek as it was pretty cool there, and I didn't have to battle my way through the thick undergrowth as well, which was a plus. But I hiked approximately about 2 miles along the creek hunting for crawdads, or crawfish, and looking for signs of deer, rabbit, or the fabled albino squirrel that we had here. I kept traveling and eventually arrived at a relatively open field that had waist-high grass. and I frequently stopped here to gather wild blackberries, rest, and spook the few white-tailed deer bedded in the area. But that day was different. You see, as I drew closer to the field, I noticed someone standing in the field. Instinctively, I slowed down, lowered my posture, and tried to minimize my noise. I really wasn't used to seeing someone out this far into the woods. The nearest house to that location was maybe about 1.5 miles through thick undergrowth and fairly steep ravines to climb. As I hugged the bank of the creek, I moved to the edge of the open field, slowly peeking up over the tall grass to see if they were still there. But nothing. I thought that perhaps they had seen or heard me trudging through the creek and instinctively ducked down too. I wasn't about to find out though, so I turned around and headed back home, all 2.5 miles back. I was more aware of my surroundings and far more cautious of my sound as I moved that time, avoiding walking in the creek to prevent the sloshing of water to give me away. As I crept through the branches jutting out into the bank of the creek, I made my way to another area that I was familiar with. A small game trail ran through here, and it would cut my time and distance back home a good bit. The only downside was that it was pretty overgrown to either side, and portions had thick thorn bushes. The entire time that I trekked back, though, I don't know, I just felt like I was being watched. I never really felt in danger or vulnerable of being attacked or anything, but I could almost swear that I felt eyes on me. I was uneasy the entire time that I followed the game trail, routinely stopping and listening to determine if I could hear footsteps, or if I was being followed at all. But still, nothing. I made it about, I would say, halfway back home when all of a sudden I saw in the corner of my eyes a figure standing a short distance away. But as I moved my eyes in the direction of the figure, they seemed to just sort of meld into the foliage. I thought that maybe my paranoia was making me see things, so I just hurried on. A few hundred more feet in, I see again another figure, this time further away out of my peripheral, and again as I looked in that direction, they sort of meld back into the background. But this time it happened twice. As I looked and that figure disappeared, another appeared again in my peripherals, closer but still a ways away. Again, the entire time I never really felt in danger or anything. Creeped out, yes, but I never felt like whatever there was nefarious in intent. This continued on for the remainder of my time, making my way back home, but the more it happened, the less I felt, I don't know, afraid of the figures. Even going as far as saying out loud, "I know you're there. I don't know what you want, but I'm not here to cause trouble." Eventually, I made it back to my backyard, and I turned around to face the woods to see if they were there, but there was nothing. Now, my father was next to the shed, burning some cut grass in the backyard. I walked over to him to tell him what I had experienced, and before I could say a word, he looked at me and, with a slight grin, said, "I saw you saw them too." I guessed that I had the look of terror written on my face. Without even missing a beat, he put down the hoe that he was using to stoke the fire, walked past me to the woodline, and pulled out the can of dip that he had in his pocket. He opened it, took a pinch out, and placed it on a stone that was jutting out from the ground and walked back. I asked what he was doing, and he said that he gave them an offering. He began explaining what he meant by the trees see and remember, that it was important that we respect nature whenever we enter her domain, and give an offering in return when we take things from her. Otherwise, she just may not let us back out. He gave me the can of dip and said that what I saw were what he believed were spirits of Native Americans keeping watch over their former land. I really didn't know what they were at the time, but I just followed suit with what my dad did whenever I made my way back into the woods. I always left an offering, and although I did see them from time to time, I never felt like I was in any danger, and I always made sure to respect them. If they appeared in my peripherals, I would travel in the opposite direction, apologizing for any transgressions. My cousins and many people in my village, They were all aware of their existence too, and just kind of gave them a wide berth whenever they appeared. I was completely oblivious to their existence, but when I learned of them and experienced them, a whole lot of people opened up about them, about some of the history of the town and stuff like that. It was an interesting experience, and it's something that I'll never forget. It definitely was creepy, but again, thankfully, I never felt like I was in any danger. In 2009, I was a delivery driver for a place that I won't name. I'd been a delivery driver for a while at this point, and I loved the job. I'm super extroverted anyway and love chatting with people, and it was just fun. I also had my fair share of mildly creepy encounters, given that I'm a girl and I was delivering in one of the sketchier areas of my city. I never thought really much of any of them, or saw any real threat. But one night in particular has always stuck with me. I worked the night shift, so from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. At around 8 p.m. this night, some guy ordered his food and the delivery was easy enough. His house was kind of creepy. Like, there were no lights, and when he answered the door, there was a foul smell that immediately hit me. He also didn't say anything, and I said my usual, there's that for you, and could I get you to fill this out? The tip thing. But he didn't reply at all, or even acknowledge me asking him to sign the slip. I didn't think too much of it, and I just headed back to the store. And almost exactly when I arrived back, another order popped up to the same house, and he had ordered the exact same thing. I was confused, but still not too worried, and took the delivery and had the same experience. No lights on, smelled terrible, and he didn't say a word. I headed back to the store feeling pretty uncomfortable, but again didn't think too much of it. But I started to get extremely uncomfortable when I arrived back to the store and another identical order was up. My manager at the time, unfortunately, didn't understand the creepiness of the whole thing and insisted that I take it. Despite my reluctance, I took it. But this time when he opened the door, I told him, "You can order more than one sandwich at a time, you know," as a sort of attempt at humor. He didn't say anything and just closed the door. I was thoroughly creeped out, and I did a sort of sprint back to the car, and when I looked back at the house, I noticed that a light was on, and I saw someone standing at the window. I couldn't make out any features, but I just assumed that it was him. In the end, I still don't know who was standing in the window or why. My manager called me from the store before I was even able to start my car to inform me that another identical delivery had popped up, and he directed me to leave as quickly as I could because he was starting to see the danger of the situation. As the call ended, I saw the man running up to my car. I couldn't move for a second because, honestly, I was just in shock, but he was yelling something that I couldn't understand. I just sped away as fast as I possibly could, given that I was shaking like a leaf. But we blacklisted this guy that night after he made several attempts to call the store. I still have no idea what his endgame was or who that other person was up the stairs. Was this an attempt to have me come back so that they could do something to me? Was that person upstairs the one ordering this stuff? And did they need help? I'm still puzzled by the whole situation, but man, was it creepy.